They weren't born fearless. They weren't born warriors. The Roman soldier you imagine, unyielding, armored, unstoppable, wasn't forged on the battlefield. He was broken first, stripped of comfort, stripped of self, rebuilt by routine. The greatest enemy wasn't the barbarian. It was boredom, exhaustion, and himself. The first step in the transformation of a Roman soldier was the erasure of the man he once was. A recruit might have grown up under olive trees, tending goats or working in the crowded stalls of a provincial marketplace. His world was familiar, filled with family voices, childhood memories, and the rhythm of village life. But the moment he stepped inside the training camp, all of it was cut away like dead branches from a tree. His hair was shorn to the scalp. Civilian clothes, the last proof of individuality, were stripped off and replaced with the rough state-issued tunic. His sandals, his belt, even his name began to feel different. He was no longer a man of his father's house. He was a tool of the Roman state. The transformation was not gentle. Officers understood that before a man could serve in the legion, he had to be broken down. Any hint of independence, any pride that might resist orders was targeted. Insults cut deeper than blades. Recruits were told they were weak, undisciplined, unworthy. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was part of the ritual. A soldier could not cling to his former life because hesitation in battle meant disaster for the entire unit. Rome demanded absolute obedience, and to achieve that, Rome began by dissolving the old identity. The centerpiece of this erasure was the sacramentum, the soldier's oath. The words bound a man's life to his commander and to the Senate and people of Rome. To disobey was treason. To desert was worse than cowardice. It was blasphemy against the sacred bond. When a man spoke the oath aloud, he gave his voice, his body, and his future to the empire. From that moment, his life was no longer his own. It is easy to imagine recruits trembling as the words echoed across the camp. Some must have wondered if they had made a mistake. Others clenched their jaws, knowing there was no turning back. For all of them, the oath was a final severing. The man who left his village behind was gone. In his place stood a legionary in training, a fragment of something larger than himself. Even the camp environment reinforced this loss of individuality. Rows of identical tents or barracks erased distinctions between rich and poor, between Italian and provincial. Each man's bed was the same, each meal the same. The rhythm of daily life, waking, drilling, eating, sleeping, was orchestrated by the blare of horns. The army spoke in commands, not requests. The soldier learned quickly that his personal will no longer mattered. His survival, his honor, even his punishment were collective. And yet there was power in this stripping away. Though it felt like loss, it was also rebirth. The Legion didn't want men who thought of themselves as individuals. It wanted parts of a machine, cogs that turned in unison. Alone, a man could be frightened, weak, and uncertain. Together, under the iron weight of discipline, they became the most formidable force the ancient world had ever seen. The Roman recruit quickly discovered that war was not waged only with swords and shields. It was waged with weight, with dust, with endless miles beneath the sun. The pack on his back was a beast of its own. Leather straps cutting into shoulders, iron tools clattering against wood, dried rations pressing down like stones. 40, sometimes 50 kilograms rode with him each day. Stakes for fortifications, cooking pots, spare sandals, a cloak, a shovel, even a grinding stone. He carried not just weapons, but the burden of survival. Rome called its legionaries mules of Marius, and for good reason. They were beasts of burden first, warriors second. Marches were the rhythm of life. 20 miles in a day was not exceptional. It was expected. The pace was steady. The column stretched like a serpent across the landscape. The centurion's voice barked over the tramp of feet, keeping time. Dust rose and clung to skin, filled mouths, stung eyes. Recruits learned to breathe shallow, to keep their eyes fixed ahead, to silence complaints. The monotony was numbing. Left, right. Left, right. Each step like the one before, each hour an echo of yesterday. And when the march ended, the work began. A soldier could not simply collapse into rest. Before he ate, before he slept, he built. Every halt meant a new camp, a fortress raised from bare earth. Ditches dug by hand, walls formed from sharpened stakes, defensive towers hammered into place. The enemy was not only beyond the horizon, it was also in time itself. Any moment without defenses was vulnerability, and Rome tolerated no weakness. The army became a construction crew as much as a fighting force. Recruits learned quickly that no energy could be spared, no corners cut. Lists defined the soldier's day, stripping it of variety: march, dig, carry, build, drill, repeat. Over and over until the body ached and the mind dulled. The routine was the real battle, not the fleeting clash of steel. What wore men down was not the sudden rush of combat, but the unending sameness of labor. But in this sameness, something happened. The pack no longer felt like a prison, but like an extension of the body. Shoulders toughened, feet calloused. The shovel became as natural to hold as the sword. Routine bent men until they nearly broke, and then it hardened them into something unrecognizable. Some recruits must have wondered as sweat soaked their tunics and muscles burned, whether this was soldiering or slavery. Was this training for war, or training to endure drudgery without complaint? The line blurred. Rome's true genius was here, hidden in the monotony. By pushing men to their limits each day, by drowning them in repetition, the empire built soldiers who could survive anything. Battle itself almost felt like a release, a sudden climax after months of grinding routine. Rome's legions did not conquer the world through heroics alone. They conquered it through endurance, through men who could carry the unbearable and still march forward when everything in them screamed to stop. Training with the Roman army was not glamorous, nor was it meant to be. It was exhausting, monotonous, and often humiliating. Recruits were handed wooden swords and shields that were intentionally heavier than their real counterparts. A wooden blade might weigh twice as much as steel, a wooden shield thick and clumsy compared to the iron-rimmed scuta used in battle. Every thrust, every parry, every block demanded more strength than the battlefield would ever require. The philosophy was simple. If a soldier could master the weight of wood, he would wield steel with ease. The drills never ended. Morning after morning, afternoon after afternoon, recruits were lined up under the eyes of their centurions. They thrust forward. They stepped back. They raised shields again. Muscles ached, shoulders screamed, blisters tore on palms. And still the whistle or bark of command demanded more. Repetition became their companion, as inescapable as the dust beneath their sandals. There was no room for creativity, no flourish of individuality. Each man had to move exactly as taught, in perfect rhythm with those beside him. But it wasn't only swordplay. Formations were drilled until they became second nature. The testudo, the shield wall, the wheeling turn, all practiced under the heat of the sun, sometimes with stones hurled at them by officers to mimic enemy missiles. Shields locked together until men could barely breathe in the stifling air beneath. The point was not comfort. The point was survival. When fear surged in real battle, muscle memory would take over. No soldier could be allowed to hesitate, not even for a heartbeat. The mental strain was as punishing as the physical. Days blurred together in an endless cycle of sweat and command. Many recruits far from home must have questioned the purpose. Was this really soldiering or just cruelty in disguise? What glory was there in swinging wood at empty air until exhaustion left you staggering? Yet those who faltered quickly discovered the sting of Roman discipline. Punishments were swift, brutal, and public. Flogging, reduction of rations, or worse. Collective punishment that forced comrades to suffer alongside the guilty. A single man's weakness could drag down an entire group, and so peers became enforcers of discipline as much as officers. Still, something grew in this crucible. Muscles thickened, movements sharpened, endurance deepened. What had begun as clumsy, aching thrusts became precise, deadly strikes. Wooden shields that once felt impossible to hold now raised effortlessly in unison. The monotony forged not only skill, but cohesion. The soldier began to feel less like an individual and more like a part of a body. Each man a limb, each formation a living creature. In time, recruits discovered that combat was not about glory or heroism. It was about not breaking rank. It was about trust, that the man beside you would not falter, that your shield would be there for him as his was for you. And while battles came and went, the real shaping of Rome's warriors happened here in the dust with wood and sweat and endless, grinding repetition. When the drills ended and the day's march was over, a soldier did not find himself alone. He found himself pressed shoulder to shoulder with the same men he had bled beside, sweated beside, cursed beside. The legion was not built only on steel and discipline. It was built on brotherhood. Rome understood that a man could be hardened through repetition, but he could only be sustained through connection. No recruit could survive long if he carried his burdens in silence. At night, the camp transformed. Fires crackled, shadows danced on leather tents, and the sharp bark of commands gave way to the low murmur of conversation. Soldiers tore bread, dipped it into shared pots of stew, passed wineskins down the line. Meals were not about flavor or abundance. They were about ritual. To eat together was to remind one another that they were not alone in the endless grind. A soldier who had no family now had a mess unit. Around that fire, laughter mingled with sighs, stories with silence. Homesickness never vanished, but it softened when shared. Every aspect of the camp enforced togetherness. A man did not choose where he slept. He shared his tent with the same comrades every night, packed so tightly that privacy disappeared. He rose with them at dawn, marched in step with them through dust and heat, drilled in formation until their shields locked together like the scales of a single beast. In time, the individual melted into the group. Bonds were forged not through speeches, but through constant, unavoidable presence. And yet it was not only companionship, it was accountability. Each soldier's survival depended on the man next to him. If one faltered on the march, the others picked up his load. If one hesitated in formation, the line shuddered and all were endangered. The Legion taught that loyalty was not sentimental, it was practical. Brotherhood was a weapon. To abandon it was to risk your own life. Still, internal conflict remained. At night, when conversation dwindled and firelight flickered low, many must have stared into the dark and thought of home. A mother's voice, a lover's embrace, the smell of fields after rain. No amount of camaraderie could fully erase that ache. The Legion did not seek to erase it. It sought to redirect it. Homesickness became longing for the man beside you, for the safety of the line, for the shared heartbeat of the unit. The army replaced one family with another, a substitution as ruthless as it was effective. Over time, recruits began to measure worth differently. In the village, a man was judged by his wealth, his craft, his lineage. In the Legion, value came from reliability. Could you hold the shield steady? Could you march without complaint? Could you be trusted in silence at midnight? A man's reputation was no longer tied to his name, but to the steadiness of his arm and the firmness of his step. Thus, the Roman army reshaped more than bodies, it reshaped identities. Men who arrived as strangers became brothers, bound not by blood but by necessity. Together they bore the weight of Rome's ambition. Alone they would have crumbled. The camp was never truly silent, but the silence of night carried a weight unlike any other. The day's noise, the clash of wooden swords, the bark of centurions, the tramp of feet, faded into stillness. Fires burned low, men curled beneath cloaks, breaths deepened into snores. But for one soldier, chosen by lot or by rotation, sleep was forbidden. His task was the night watch, and in the Roman army it was among the most feared duties of all. Darkness stretched across the camp, broken only by torchlight flickering on sharpened stakes. Beyond the palisade lay shadow and uncertainty. An enemy could be out there waiting for weakness, or there could be nothing, just empty hills, a whispering breeze. That was the torment. The soldier could not know, and so every rustle, every creak of wood, every shift of wind set his heart racing. Eyes strained to pierce the dark. Ears ached from listening too hard. Minutes dragged, each second heavier than the last. And then came the greater battle, fatigue. After marching 20 miles, digging ditches, hauling logs, and drilling under the sun, the body cried out for rest. Eyelids drooped, muscles trembled, thoughts blurred. The soldier walked back and forth, forcing himself to move, to stay awake. He clenched fists. He muttered fragments of prayer. He counted heartbeats. He pressed nails into palms just to feel the sting. Because one slip, one nod of the head meant ruin. The punishment for falling asleep on watch was not a slap on the wrist. It was death. Rome was merciless. If a guard was caught dozing, he could be stoned by his own comrades or clubbed to death on the order of a centurion. Why such cruelty? Because a single lapse could doom thousands. A silent enemy slipping through an unguarded gate could slaughter an entire camp before dawn. Rome did not forgive carelessness. Rome turned it into an example, and so the soldier endured, step by step, breath by breath. His world shrank to the sound of his boots on packed earth, the glow of torches, the vast sweep of stars overhead. He might glance toward the tents, see the shapes of his sleeping comrades, and feel the sting of isolation. Alone, he bore the burden of their survival. Alone, he wrestled with the weight of exhaustion. There were moments when the night seemed endless, when he was sure the horn would never sound to release him, when despair crept in, whispering that no man could fight both darkness and fatigue forever. But somehow he pressed on, because he had to, because Rome demanded it. The night watch was more than a duty, it was a crucible. It taught that vigilance mattered more than valor, that endurance mattered more than courage. To survive those lonely hours was to understand the essence of soldiering. The enemy was not always at the gate. Sometimes the enemy was within, the weakness of the flesh, the longing for rest, the temptation to surrender. Overcoming that made the legionary something more than a man. It made him part of Rome's unbreakable wall. The popular imagination pictures Roman soldiers locked in constant battle, their days consumed by blood and glory. The truth was far more grueling, far more ordinary. Most of a legionary's life was not spent with sword in hand, but with shovel, hammer, and axe. Their enemy was not always another army, it was the land itself. Campaigns required roads, and Rome demanded that roads endure for centuries. Soldiers hacked through forests, leveled ground, and laid stone. Each mile of straight, unyielding roadway bore the imprint of countless aching backs and blistered hands. Bridges rose where rivers cut the path. Ditches drained marshes. Mountains were carved, valleys filled. A legion was not simply an army. It was a workforce, moving the empire forward one stone at a time. But construction was only part of it. Camps had to be rebuilt daily, palisades sharpened, wells dug. Fields were cleared for agriculture, granaries repaired, aqueducts maintained. A soldier could wake one morning expecting a march and find himself instead hauling timber, repairing roads, or digging yet another trench. Labor blurred with soldiering until the two became indistinguishable. The legion was as much an engine of civilization as it was a weapon of war. To the recruit, this could feel like betrayal. He had sworn an oath expecting glory, perhaps imagining himself charging into battle with sword raised. Instead, he found his days consumed by monotony, hammer strikes echoing against stone, sweat dripping into dust, the endless repetition of manual toil. Was this what he left his home for? To build walls instead of breaking enemies? To dig when he had been promised conquest? And yet this was Rome's genius. By forcing men into unrelenting labor, the army taught that endurance was its own form of combat. A soldier who could swing a pick for hours without complaint could also hold a shield wall steady under a rain of arrows. A soldier who could march 20 miles carrying stones could also march into battle with armor and weapons. Fatigue was the invisible enemy, and Rome trained its men to defeat it daily. Still, the toll was real. Shoulders ached, hands cracked, backs stiffened. Doubt gnawed at the edges of the mind. Some surely dreamed of their villages, where work meant food on the table for family, not endless toil for a distant empire. Yet even in doubt, the legion demanded more. To falter was to shame the unit. To resist was to invite punishment. The only path forward was obedience. In this way, the monotony became the crucible. The soldiers carved not only roads and walls, but also themselves. Every stone lifted, every trench dug was a small act of submission to Rome's will. And when the rare day of battle finally came, it was almost a relief. Compared to weeks of ceaseless labor, combat was brief, sharp, decisive. Glory was fleeting. Routine was eternal. Rome was built not only by victories, but by the sweat of men who fought wars without battles. When dawn broke over the Roman camp, it revealed a truth often hidden beneath tales of conquest. The soldier's greatest transformation had not come from a clash of swords or the roar of victory. It had come from endurance, from days upon days of sameness, from nights spent staring into darkness, clinging to wakefulness as the world slept, from endless marches where dust burned the throat and sweat soaked through tunics, from repetition so relentless it carved new identities into the men who bore it. The Roman soldier was not born from triumph. He was born from monotony. The drills, the labor, the watch, all of it forged resilience sharper than any blade. His courage was not the sudden surge of a hero in battle, but the quiet resolve to rise each morning and shoulder the same crushing burden once again. Strength was not in the strike, but in the repetition of strikes until muscle forgot exhaustion and the body moved on command. There were sacrifices unspoken but heavy, homes left behind, families abandoned, years stolen by routine. The ache of distance never fully faded. Even as comrades became brothers, there remained a part of every soldier that longed for the warmth of his own hearth, the laughter of children, the comfort of belonging somewhere other than the endless road. That ache was never conquered, it was carried. And perhaps that was Rome's greatest test of all. not to erase the human heart, but to demand that it endure despite its wounds. When we think of Rome, we imagine its towering monuments, its sweeping roads, its victories etched into stone. But behind every triumph stood the nameless thousands who labored without glory. Soldiers who dug ditches instead of winning medals. Soldiers who kept silent watch while others dreamed. Soldiers who endured repetition until it became their nature. The empire's foundations were not only marble and concrete, they were muscle, bone, and sweat. What makes a warrior? It is not only courage in the heat of battle, nor the rush of triumph when an enemy breaks. It is the patience to endure, the discipline to repeat, the strength to continue when every fiber begs to stop. The Roman legionary embodied this truth. Ordinary men were shaped into something extraordinary not because they were fearless, but because they learned to march on through fear, fatigue, and longing. Their legacy endures not in individual names, but in the idea they carried, that discipline and endurance can build an empire. They proved that victory is not a single moment, but a lifetime of moments strung together, each one an act of persistence. Rome's armies conquered not only with steel, but with silence, labor, and the unyielding rhythm of routine. So when you picture a Roman soldier, do not imagine only the clash of battle. Imagine the march at dawn. Imagine the watch in darkness. Imagine the burden carried day after day. That was the crucible. That was the secret. That was how Rome forged men into warriors. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.